Hey, welcome back to Smiles for Miles. I'm Brian, or Smiles, and I'm coming at you from house arrest. And this week on house arrest, everyone lives in relationship to everything else in their lives. This means other people, our jobs, our stuff, our phones, ourselves, and yes, of course, substances and behaviors of all kinds. Now, people who have any kind of destructive relationship to a substance or any kind of behavior that they're engaging in their life, it seems to me that the reason for that is always because they're looking for happiness. We're all looking for happiness and contentment, and when we're not finding that in other areas in our lives, the substances and or behavioral patterns can emerge that exist as a way to fill a hole in our lives or to escape from something, to pacify ourselves because of some condition. Now, I want to bring to your attention the current and overwhelmingly the most prevalent addiction disease model paradigm that we have in our culture and the framing that puts around these issues. And that framing is one of powerlessness over these substances or behaviors. It's one of helplessness. It's one of loss of control or enslavement to the substance or behavior. It's a framing of you have an incurable disease. In any case, the behavior or substance is seen as the enemy. That's the problem. And, as 12-step puts it, these substances say are cunning, baffling, and powerful. So again, everyone lives in relationship, whether it's a healthy one or an unhealthy one, a productive or destructive one, with everything else in their life. And if any one individual becomes too out of balance in a negative way with any one of these things that they're in relation to, we have all adopted this mentality that, okay, now they're at some point powerless, they're somehow at some point helpless, at some point they have a disease, and the focus falls to the thing itself being problematic. The relationship is out of balance due to the thing. And I think this is why, because of this framing, that we have so many new epidemics of addiction popping up all the time. Internet porn addiction, internet addiction, phone addiction, there's, gambling addiction, sex addiction, addiction to all kinds of different substances, food addictions, and then we have new forms of treatment and recovery, which are mostly 12-step based programs with the same kind of mental framing popping up to address it as a solution. It has become my view through my own experience with getting away from problematic substances that I was addicted to, that the problem really is not the thing itself. Fundamentally, the problem is that people are dissatisfied with their lives. And I don't really find this very surprising. I mean, we are all absolutely lost in this culture that lacks any wholesome values and seems to be manufacturing dissatisfaction on an epidemic scale. I think when the heart of the teachings in this traditional addiction recovery paradigm keep being pushed, which is to live in fear of these objects of escape or pacification, the objects themselves, and to merely, find ways to abstain from them completely. All that's really happening, it seems like, is you're taking away this Band-Aid that's helping, get people through the day, and get people through their lives ultimately. It just leaves this kind of vacuum, which is very liable to be replaced by something else that is, equally unhelpful. The soul of the problem isn't really being addressed. And I think the statistics of these addiction epidemics are bearing that out, that this framing isn't really working and it's not addressing something that is the deeper problem. Because as more and more recovery centers and therapies and modes of fixing this within that paradigm are exploding. I mean, we've had huge explosions in this since the turn of the century, whereas before in the 80s and 90s, addiction rates were pretty stable. As this stuff at the turn of the century has exploded, this paradigm more and more, the problems have only been multiplying and just getting worse. You know, more pop up, and the ones that have always been around are worse than they've ever been. My thinking on this is that we must start to investigate a path to happiness first. We must start, as individuals who suffer from these types of things in our lives, we must start to outline and really make clear to ourselves what we want in life, what we want our lives to look like, and start to design a definitive approach to moving in that direction. We have to start discovering better reasons to rid ourselves of these problems than just for the sake of doing it and to clean up a mess that maybe we're creating in our lives, in the lives of the people around us. We have to have a more goal-oriented and progressive reason for getting rid of this stuff that replaces the emptiness that is underlying the problem in the first place. I think once we as individuals find some clarification on what that initial step looks like for us, then the fear-based mental framing kind of stops making sense and it starts to dissolve automatically. And then a more informed and dignified appraisal of your relationship to the problematic things in your life becomes possible. In my last upload last week, we talked about the expectation effect and how mental framing really has a deep and profound effect on how we move through our lives. We had examples of a lot of research that shows that people who are just, told that they are deprived in some way or are in danger in some way, respond that way, not only just in their own experience, but in their biochemistry and everything. It's very powerful, the stories we tell ourselves about what's going on. And subconsciously, our lives will conform to the way that we're framing the circumstances of our lives. I want to read to you just a couple of lines from this book I came across, The Freedom Model for Addictions, Escape the Treatment and Recovery Trap. This is just a quick paragraph on some research that sort of tied into the expectation effect stuff that I was talking about before. And what I'm going to read is basically a quote. I'm paraphrasing just a few words here just to put it in context, because you didn't read the whole 2 pages. But basically what I'm saying is word for word almost. Research in which alcoholics were given a test to gauge how strongly they believed in several common tenets of addiction, such as loss of control or genetic predisposition to alcoholism, showed that those who believed most strongly in addiction were more likely to relapse following treatment. In fact, this belief system was one of the top predictions of relapse after controlling for dozens of other factors, including the severity of the drinking problem. Other research has shown that those exposed to these ideas formally in treatment subsequently had binge drinking rates 9 times higher than those who were exposed to a more choice-based view, and the ones who were exposed to the more choice-based view had a binge rate 5 times higher than those who received no treatment at all. Heroin users binge after treatment too, as was shown by a study of over 150,000 heroin addicts in England that overdose risk skyrocketed in the weeks immediately following the completion of treatment. As belief in addiction as a true state of involuntary substance use has exploded in our culture, so too have rates of addiction. Conversely, cultures in which people do not believe drugs can cause the loss of control exhibit very little of it being loss of control or addiction. So as opposed to, this view that these substances and behaviors, I guess, are cunning, baffling, and powerful, what seems to me is actually cunning, baffling, and powerful is your beliefs that you hold in your own mind and how deeply they can affect, what you tell yourself about what you're actually capable of. In spite of all of the, information that I've been given through my, time being addicted to stuff and through, the treatment programs that I've been exposed to and the information I've been exposed to and all the minimal resources available, or the very one-sided resources that have been available throughout this whole, Department of Corrections experience that I've gone through. In spite of all that, I've had this sort of notion that conflicts with that I don't have this fear-based relationship to these substances. I've never felt that they were, cunning, baffling, or powerful. I've never felt that deeply, and I've always struggled with that because I'm like, am I in denial about, what's going to happen in the future and how powerless I actually am? And part of my liability to go back to that stuff is because I'm not accepting how powerless I am. But I just never could really, get in bed with this idea that I was powerless and that the substances were so aggressive. The relationship that I've found myself in now regarding these things is that, I just feel like I'm choosing my relationship with them. I'm choosing not to have a relationship with them. In other words, I'm not afraid of heroin and meth. Using those things just doesn't fit into my life anymore because I have more important things to focus on, more fulfilling things to focus on. I guess sort of a test of this that I should mention is that I have actually, since I've been out on house arrest, I have found heroin in my stuff on multiple occasions. I had a van that I was living in before I was arrested, and there's heroin everywhere all the time, and I got some of that stuff back when I came out. My family had some of my things that they recovered, and it was just bags of cords and music equipment and video game stuff and whatever, and books. And on that stuff, as I went through it on multiple different occasions, I discovered clumps of heroin on it that were plenty to get high on, plenty enough to do. And I remember each time I've encountered that, I have actually been kind of perplexed at what a non-issue it was. Because I would, and I think the reason for that is because I still have, this old framing stuff as far as, 12-step and addiction recovery stuff rattling around in my head. And I thought it should be more of a problem since these things are so cunning, baffling, and powerful. Maybe that's the cunning thing that it was doing, is showing up in my hand, while no one's at home, and I could totally do it and get away with it. But it was just such a non-issue. It didn't even really occur to me to do it. I just was like, oh, and I wiped it off and threw it in the toilet and flushed it. I just wasn't. I was surprised at how uninterested I was in making it any more of a thing than it was. Anyway, the last thing that I want to say, and that I want to be very clear about, is that I am by no means trying to disregard the fact that 12-step and this paradigm has helped many people. It definitely does, and it definitely works for some people. I don't think as many as they claim it does, according to all of the evidence that we have now that runs counter to that. But what I'm advocating for here is just open-mindedness and the acceptance that there are different ways, because according to those traditions, that's the only way. They drum that into you. That's the only way. And if that's the only way for you, that's the only way that works for any individual, that's a fucking amazing. Like, that's perfect. Do that for sure and stick with it if that's what works for you. That's totally fine. I have no problem with that. I'm not trying to change anyone's mind who has found the solution for them. All I'm advocating for is that, you know, we keep an open mind and say, you know, this works for some people and you should definitely try it out if you need something. But the problem is that that's the only avenue, really. Just overwhelmingly, that's the only avenue. And it doesn't work for me. And if it doesn't work for me, then I'm sure there's many more people that it certainly doesn't work for either. And that's okay. You know, it's okay if it's okay that one size doesn't fit all. And that's what I'm trying to get away from here. It's like there are other options, there are other avenues, and you just, you know, really you have to figure out what works for you. But I think it's so important when people are really early on and they're struggling to know, you know, to at least be aware that there are other ways to approach this thing. There are other ways to get your life back on track, and there are other ways to move past these problems that you have without having to like live under this sort of regime that insists that you always identify with these problems the way that they want you to identify with them. It's just not the case. Like, there's people recover all the time in all different ways, without treatment, with traditional treatment, with their own sort of treatment. There's there's just as many ways to get through this as there are individuals. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of just scientific information and just well-established understandings that run really counter to the traditional modes of getting through this stuff. And there's an overwhelming amount. It's actually shocking to me that this one is still the only thing that is really pressed on people. It's not only pressed on people through, you know, addiction recovery. It's pressed on people through society. It's pressed on people through the criminal justice system. Everything about it is structured around this one mode of thinking about these problems. And I think we need just like a cultural sort of update on what to do about this, because it's clearly what we're doing now is not working. All right, that's it for now. I want to give a quick shout out to Jolie, my friend Jolie Poley. He's dear friend of mine, and I was thinking about it, and he actually has dealt with my addiction stuff more, besides my ex-wife. He's the one who's dealt with it more than anybody else, and you know, just directly. He's you know, had interventions with me. He's like painstakingly driven me across the state to rehab when he didn't have time to. He's, you know, employed me when I was in the midst of the worst of my addiction. He's always been there trying to help and step in and just always, though, so cool, and just been such a, you know, good friend, like a real good friend. He's like one of my favorite people in the whole wide world, and I love you to death, Joel. And you know, I'm sure you'll leave a comment about this, so I'm curious to see what you have to say. Something probably snarky and cynical, for sure, but that's what I love about you. So do it. The song of the week this week, I dare say, is a Radiohead song. I've been listening to this shit my entire life, and it's just the coolest music in the whole wide world to me. And if you haven't listened to Radiohead before and you check out this song, there's a really good chance you won't like it. But I've just been having, for some reason, this particular Radiohead song has been stuck in my head. So the song is Sit Down, Stand Up by Radiohead. The song's in 4/4, but there's that fifth measure of 4 on each phrase. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, I don't know why that just gets me. I love that shit. Okay, thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.